November 20th, 1942. The frozen earth outside Moscow cracked beneath Marshal Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov's boots as he stepped from the staff car into the pre-dawn darkness. The temperature had dropped to -18 °C overnight, and his breath formed clouds that hung motionless in the still air. Behind him, the headquarters building of the Western Front stood dark except for a single window on the second floor where oil lamps burned. Inside that room, maps covered every surface, marked with red and blue pencils showing the dispositions of armies that would, in 5 days, attempt what no Soviet force had yet accomplished against the Germans, the complete destruction of an entire enemy army. Zhukov was 46 years old. He had commanded armies for 3 years, had orchestrated the defense of Moscow 12 months earlier, had prevented the Wehrmacht from taking Leningrad when every analysis suggested the city would fall. Joseph Stalin trusted him more than any other general in the Red Army, which meant Stalin distrusted him less than the others. Now Stalin had given him the most ambitious operation of the war. 2 operations, actually. One at Stalingrad, already underway, coordinated by Alexander Vasilevsky. The other here, northwest of Moscow, in the Reserve salient where German Ninth Army had dug in like a dagger pointed at the Soviet capital. The Reserve salient. Zhukov had studied it for months. The Germans held a bulge in the front lines 150 kilometers wide and 150 kilometers deep, anchored on the town of Reserve. From there, Field Marshal Walter Model commanded positions so heavily fortified that Soviet intelligence estimated it would take a year of siege warfare to reduce them. Model was brilliant, defensive-minded, the kind of German general who understood that in war, he who holds the ground makes the enemy pay in blood for every meter. Zhukov climbed the stairs to the map room. Inside, General Ivan Konev, commander of the Western Front, stood hunched over a table studying reconnaissance photographs. Beside him, General Maxim Perkiev, commander of Kalinin Front, traced a finger along a blue line representing the Vazuza River. Both men looked up when Zhukov entered. "The weather," Konev said without preamble. "If this continues, we'll have fog through the 25th. Maybe longer." Zhukov removed his gloves and moved to the central map table. The operation, codenamed Mars, covered the entire surface in overlapping acetate sheets marked with unit symbols and attack arrows. 6 Soviet armies. 7 mechanized and tank corps. Over 600,000 men in the initial assault, with another 400,000 in reserve. Against them, Model commanded approximately 350,000 Germans, but Germans who had been fortifying their positions since February. "Fog helps us," Zhukov said. "It grounds their reconnaissance aircraft. It conceals our assembly areas. It also grounds our own air support," Perkiev pointed out. "And it makes artillery observation impossible." Zhukov had heard this argument before. "The artillery barrage is timed and planned. We have coordinates for every German strongpoint. And if the coordinates are wrong?" Perkiev asked. "Then the infantry will find them," Zhukov said. "And they will eliminate them." The room went quiet. Both generals knew what that meant. Infantry finding enemy positions meant infantry dying while they located machine gun nests, anti-tank guns, fortified bunkers. It meant casualties measured in thousands, tens of thousands. But there was no alternative. The Germans had to be destroyed here, at Reserve, or they would use this salient as a staging area for another assault on Moscow when spring came. Zhukov moved to the northern section of the map. Perkiev, your Kalinin front will attack here, at Olnino and Belly. The 39th Army drives southwest, the 22nd Army drives west. You pinch off the northern shoulder of the salient. Konyev, your western front attacks from the east and south. The 20th, 31st, and 30th Armies. You break through here and here, link up with Kalinin front, and we encircle Model's entire 9th Army. 700,000 Germans cut off, out of supply, with winter setting in. And if we don't break through? Konyev asked. It was the question Zhukov had been asking himself for weeks. If they did not break through, if the attack stalled in the German defenses, then Mars would become what every failed Soviet offensive had become in 1942, a slaughter. We will break through, Zhukov said. We have numerical superiority. We have surprise. We have winter on our side. Perkiev looked unconvinced. We had all those things in July. And in August. Model held. Zhukov felt his jaw tighten. Perkiev was correct. The summer offensives had failed. 30,000 casualties in July. Another 40,000 in August. But those had been hasty attacks, poorly coordinated, without adequate reserves. Mars was different. Mars had been planned methodically, had been given priority in allocation of tanks, artillery, ammunition. July and August were reconnaissance in force, Zhukov said. This is the real offensive. This is where we destroy Army Group Center. He did not mention that simultaneously, 500 kilometers south, Vasilevsky was launching Operation Uranus at Stalingrad. Did not mention that the Red Army was attempting to encircle and destroy two entire German army groups at once. If both operations succeeded, the war might be over by spring. If both failed, there might not be a Red Army left to fight in spring. Casualties, Perkiev said quietly. What are we accepting for this operation? Zhukov had run the calculations with his staff. The numbers had come back the same every time. To break through fortified positions held by 350,000 Germans would require committing over 1 million Soviet soldiers. We will accept what is necessary, Zhukov said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. Comrade General, the Germans have been sitting in the Rezev salient for 10 months. They're 100 kilometers from Moscow. If we don't destroy them now, they'll destroy us in spring. So yes, we will take casualties. Yes, men will die. But they're dying anyway. Better they die taking ground than holding it. It was the logic of Soviet military doctrine, the mathematics of total war. The Red Army had more men than the Wehrmacht had bullets. If you could force the Germans to expend ammunition killing Soviet soldiers faster than German factories could replace that ammunition, then eventually the Germans would run out of bullets and the war would be won. November 21st, Zhukov spent the day visiting forward units. At 3rd Mechanized Corps, positioned behind 30th Army's attack sector, the Corps commander Major General Mikhail Solomatin had his tanks dispersed in forest positions 5 kilometers from the front line. We're ready, Comrade Marshal, Solomatin said. But the ground concerns me. If it freezes solid, excellent. If it thaws, we'll be immobilized. It will freeze, Zhukov said, though he had no way of knowing. When you break through, how far can you advance before needing resupply? 40 kilometers. Maybe 50 if we don't engage in prolonged fighting. That would be enough. If 3rd Mechanized Corps could break through and reach the supply depots at Sychevka, Model's entire army would be cut off from reinforcement. The 9th Army would starve in place, would run out of ammunition, would be forced to surrender or die. From 3rd Mechanized Corps, Zhukov drove to 30th Army headquarters. General Lelyashenko commanded here, a tanker promoted to command an infantry army. The Germans know we're coming, Lelyashenko said, spreading a map on a makeshift table. Patrols report increased activity in their forward positions. They're bringing up reserves. How many reserves? Unknown. But they're moving at night, using back roads. That was Model's style. Defensive flexibility. Keep reserves mobile, wait for the enemy to commit, then counterattack at the point of decision. When you attack, Zhukov said, you keep pushing regardless of flanks. If Model counterattacks from the sides, you continue forward. The breakthrough is everything. That evening, Zhukov returned to front headquarters and found a message waiting from Stalin. The text was brief. Comrade Zhukov. Uranus begins tomorrow. I expect Mars to begin as scheduled. Report results immediately. Stalin. November 22. The meteorological report arrived at 0600 hours. Temperature dropping, clear skies expected, ground freezing to a depth of 30 centimeters. Perfect conditions for tanks, for artillery observation, for aircraft. Exactly the opposite of what Zhukov had told his generals the day before. The weather is clearing, Zhukov said when Konyev and Perkiev arrived. We'll have clear skies on the 25th. German reconnaissance will see our assembly areas. Do we delay? Konyev asked. Zhukov considered it. Delaying might allow weather to deteriorate again. But delaying also gave the Germans more time to prepare, more time to bring up reserves. And delaying meant operating out of synchronization with Uranus. We proceed as planned, Zhukov said. Clear weather benefits our aircraft as much as theirs. That afternoon, Zhukov reviewed casualty estimates with his Chief of Staff, Colonel General Vasily Sokolovsky. Initial assault, 48 hours, estimated 70,000 casualties. Exploitation phase, 7 days, estimated another 80,000. Holding the encirclement, 14 days, estimated 120,000. Total projected casualties. 270,000 killed, wounded, captured, missing. These estimates assume we break through, Sokolovsky pointed out. If we don't break through, if the attacks stall, casualties could double. Zhukov had considered that possibility. If Mars lasted 25 days without achieving encirclement, casualties would exceed 500,000. More than half the attacking force. We will break through, Zhukov said. The plan is sound. The forces are adequate. Sokolovsky looked at the casualty estimates for a long moment. Comrade Marshal, if we lose 500,000 men and fail to destroy Model's army, there won't be enough forces left to defend Moscow if the Germans counterattack in spring. It was the calculation Zhukov had been avoiding. Everything depended on the breakthrough. Everything depended on Soviet infantry crossing 200 meters of frozen ground under machine gun fire and reaching German trenches before casualties became unsustainable. Then we don't fail, Zhukov said. November 23, reports from Stalingrad. Uranus had begun. Vasilevsky's forces had broken through Romanian positions north and south of the city. German Sixth Army was being encircled. Within 72 hours, Vasilevsky would have Sixth Army completely surrounded. Zhukov read the reports and felt the weight of comparison. Vasilevsky was succeeding. Vasilevsky had broken through in less than 48 hours. And Vasilevsky was doing it against Romanians, against second-rate armies that collapsed under pressure. Mars would be different. Mars was attacking Germans, attacking Model's Ninth Army, attacking the best defensive positions on the entire Eastern Front. November 24, final coordination meetings. Zhukov met with all army commanders, gathered in a bunker complex south of Kalinin. Kalinin front attacks at 0430 hours on the 25th, Zhukov said. Artillery preparation is 90 minutes. Infantry assault begins at 0600. Objectives, Olnino and Beli. Western front attacks at 0700. Artillery preparation is 2 hours. Infantry assault at 0900. Objectives, breakthrough along the Vazuza River, penetration of 15 kilometers by end of day 1. 15 kilometers. One of the army commanders spoke up. Through fortified German positions. 15 kilometers minimum, Zhukov said. Model's rear areas begin at 20 kilometers. We need to be through the fortifications and into open ground within 48 hours or the operation fails. The room was silent. Every officer understood what that meant. Comrades, Zhukov said. This is the operation that ends German hopes of taking Moscow. This is where we prove the Red Army can not only defend, but attack and destroy. The officers filed out. Zhukov remained in the bunker, standing at the map table, looking at the arrows and symbols that represented 600,000 men. If Mars failed, those 600,000 men would die for nothing. November 25, 0430 hours. The artillery barrage began. 2,000 guns firing simultaneously across a front of 80 kilometers. The sound was continuous, a rolling thunder that made conversation impossible. The walls shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Outside, the horizon glowed orange from muzzle flashes and explosions. Zhukov watched the chronometer. 90 minutes of bombardment. Artillery officers had calculated that 90 minutes would destroy German forward positions, would level bunkers, would detonate minefields. The calculations assumed German positions were where intelligence said they were. At 0600 hours, the barrage shifted deeper. Infantry attacking now. Zhukov had no way of knowing if it was working. Initial reports would not arrive for 30 minutes. The first reports came at 0635. 39th Army reporting heavy resistance. Forward units encountering intact German positions. Casualties mounting. Artillery had not destroyed the fortifications. 22nd Army reporting breakthrough in 2 sectors. Infantry advancing, encountering minefields. Western Front beginning its barrage. By 0900, when Western Front's infantry attacked, Kalinin Front had penetrated German lines in 5 separate locations. But penetrations were not breakthrough. Penetrations were narrow wedges driven into enemy territory, with German forces still holding on both flanks. Zhukov ordered 3rd Mechanized Corps forward. Solomidin's tanks entered the battle at 1000 hours. Initial reports were positive. Tanks crossing the river, advancing into German rear areas. Then contact was lost. By nightfall on November 25, the situation was unclear. Some units reported success. Others reported being pinned down. Casualties were high but not catastrophic. No single breakthrough had been achieved. Zhukov reviewed reports with Konyev and Perkiev. Both generals recommended consolidation. "We continue," Zhukov said. "Tomorrow, we commit the exploitation forces. We widen the breakthroughs. And if we can't?" Perkiev asked. "Then we commit more forces until we can." The days that followed merged into a continuous cycle of orders, reports, adjustments. By November 30, 5th Army had penetrated 12 kilometers but had lost 40% of its strength. 39th Army had captured Olnino but was surrounded. 3rd Mechanized Corps was encircled near Belly, completely cut off. The operation was failing. December 1, Zhukov stood in the map room looking at the situation reports. The Reserve salient remained intact. Model's 9th Army was battered but unbroken. Soviet casualties exceeded 150,000. The breakthrough had not occurred. Stalin telephoned at 0300 hours on December 2. "Comrade Zhukov. Report on Mars." Zhukov chose his words carefully. "We have penetrated German defenses in multiple sectors. The enemy is resisting with all available forces. Additional time is required to complete the encirclement." Time. Stalin's voice carried skepticism. Vasilevsky required 72 hours to encircle Stalingrad. "You've had 1 week and you haven't reached Sychevka. The terrain is different. The enemy is different. We are making progress. Progress does not win wars, Comrade Marshal. Results win wars. I'm giving you 10 more days. If you cannot destroy Model's army in 10 days, you will terminate the operation." The line went dead. 10 days. Zhukov had committed 600,000 men to this operation. Had accepted casualties that now exceeded 200,000. Had promised Stalin that Mars would succeed. And now he had 10 days to achieve what 7 days had not accomplished. He could continue attacking, could commit every remaining reserve. Men would die. Units would be destroyed. Casualties might reach 300,000, 400,000. And at the end, the Reserve salient might still exist. Or he could terminate the operation. Pull back. Accept that Mars had failed. Preserve what remained of his forces. Save lives that would otherwise be wasted. Zhukov walked to the window. Outside, snow was falling. The temperature had dropped to -25°C. Winter had arrived in full force. He made his decision. Not based on strategy or tactics. Based on something simpler and more brutal. Based on the fact that if he stopped now, every man who had died in the past week would have died for nothing. Continue the offensive, Zhukov told his staff. Commit all reserves. All units attack until they cannot attack any longer. December continued with the same grinding brutality. Soviet units attacked, penetrated German positions, were counterattacked and isolated. Casualties mounted. By December 15, casualties exceeded 300,000. The operation had lasted 20 days and achieved none of its objectives. Zhukov issued termination orders on December 20. Units were to disengage, withdraw to starting positions. The order was classified secret. Officially, Operation Mars had never been intended as a major offensive. Officially, it had been a diversionary attack designed to prevent German forces from reinforcing Stalingrad. Officially, it had succeeded. Unofficially, every soldier who had participated knew the truth. Mars had been an attempt to destroy Army Group Center. And it had failed. The final casualty report arrived in January 1943. Total losses for Operation Mars: 335,000 killed, wounded, missing. Tank losses, 1,600. Artillery losses, over 1,000 guns. For those losses, Soviet forces had gained an average of 2 kilometers of ground along a front that would be abandoned by the Germans in March when Model received permission to withdraw. Zhukov wrote his official after-action report in February. He attributed the failure to underestimation of German defensive capabilities, to inadequate artillery support, to weather that prevented proper air operations. He did not mention that he had ordered attacks to continue long after it was clear they would not succeed. Did not mention that he had committed reserves piecemeal. Did not mention that he had accepted casualties that approached total losses sustained by the entire Red Army in some months of 1941. The report was filed and classified. Mars disappeared from official Soviet military history. When veterans spoke of Reserve, they called it the meat grinder, but they did not specify which operation they meant. Mars became just another forgotten disaster. But Zhukov remembered. Remembered the decision made on December 2. The decision to continue attacking when stopping would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. He had chosen to accept massive losses. Had chosen to believe that enough pressure would break even the strongest defense. Had chosen wrong. In the decades that followed, as Zhukov rose to command the final assault on Berlin, as he became the most decorated general in Soviet history, he never spoke publicly about Operation Mars except to dismiss it as a diversion. Never admitted it had been intended as a major offensive. Never acknowledged the casualties. But in his private notes, discovered after his death in 1974, he had written a single line about December 1942. I learned at Reserve that even the strongest will cannot break the strongest defense. I learned what accepting losses means. I learned that some decisions haunt you regardless of how the war ends. The decision made in November 1942 had been to accept massive losses in pursuit of a strategic victory. The decision had been based on calculations that proved incorrect, on assumptions that proved false, on confidence that proved overestimated. The decision had cost 335,000 casualties and achieved nothing. But it was a decision made in uncertainty. Made without knowing that Mars would fail. Made in a context where every option involved losses, where doing nothing meant accepting eventual defeat. Georgy Zhukov made that decision. Accepted those losses. Lived with the consequences. And 14 months later, used the lessons learned at Reserve to plan operations that succeeded where Mars had failed. History would remember Zhukov for his victories. For Stalingrad. For Kursk. For Berlin. But the decision that defined his approach to war was made in November 1942, in darkness and uncertainty, when accepting massive losses seemed the only path to ending the threat that stood 100 kilometers from Moscow. The decision was made. The losses were accepted. And in the frozen forests of the Reserve salient, 335,000 Soviet soldiers paid the price for a plan that proved unworkable against an enemy that proved unbreakable. Operation Mars stands as one of the forgotten tragedies of the Eastern Front. While Operation Uranus at Stalingrad succeeded and became celebrated, Mars disappeared from Soviet military history for decades. Only with the opening of Soviet archives in the 1990s did historians gain access to the full scope of the operation and its catastrophic cost. The debate continues about whether Zhukov bore personal responsibility for the failure. What remains undeniable is that in November 1942, Soviet military leadership made a decision to launch an offensive that would cost over 300,000 casualties in pursuit of an objective that proved unattainable. The lessons learned from that failure would shape Soviet operations for the remainder of the war, but the cost of learning those lessons was paid in blood by soldiers who trusted their commanders knew what they were asking. If this story touched you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, and like the video. We explore the human dimensions of war, the moments when individuals face unpredictable choices. Thanks for watching.